The fire came before the sound. I was 3 miles into the ridge trail, checking the weather relay on the north tower, when something tore across the sky above me and turned the darkness orange. I had been a wilderness ranger for 11 years. I had seen lightning start fires, seen small planes go down in fog, seen things that had no easy name, but nothing had ever moved like that. Whatever crossed the sky did not fall the way anything natural falls. It slowed just for a second. It slowed, and then it hit the treine on the far side of the ravine with a sound that pushed against my chest like a fist. I ran. The smoke reached me before the heat did. It was pale, almost silver in the beam of my headlamp, and it did not smell like burning wood. It was chemical and sharp like copper wire left on a hot stove. My radio crackled twice and went dead. I assumed the impact had knocked out the relay. I did not stop moving. The ravine dropped steeply on the east side of the ridge. I went down it on my hands and knees in sections, grabbing roots and rocks, my pack banging against my spine. At the bottom, I found the creek bed and followed it east toward the glow. And after roughly 4 minutes of hard movement, I found the craft. It had plowed a gouge 30 feet wide through the pines before coming to rest with its nose buried in the far bank of the creek. The trees it had knocked down were still smoking at their broken ends. The hull was unlike anything I had a word for. It was not metal the way aircraft are metal. It had a surface that seemed almost to breathe, panels of something pale and faintly translucent, and it had been badly damaged on one side where the edge had sheared against the granite of the ravine wall. There was a split in the hull near what I guessed was the rear section, wide enough for a person to enter. I stood there for 3 seconds. I am not proud to admit that. 3 seconds of standing completely still, looking at something that should not exist, while my brain tried very hard to find a familiar category for it and failed entirely. Then I heard the sound from inside, and I stopped thinking about categories. It was a low sound, not mechanical, biological, the sound a living thing makes when it is trying not to make any sound at all, and failing. I went through the gap in the hull. The interior was dim by panels of faint blue light that were flickering badly. The floor was not flat, curved in ways that made my balance uncertain. There were structures inside that I did not understand. Surfaces that might have been seats or storage or something with no human equivalent, and the air was thicker somehow, carrying that same copper wire smell, but stronger. At the far end, past a section of collapsed interior wall, I found him. He was on the floor, pressed against the curved hull, and he was watching me with 2 eyes that were too large and the wrong color, a deep amber that caught the blue emergency light and held it. His skin was pale, almost white, with faint lines of bioluminescence running beneath the surface that pulsed very slowly. He had 4 limbs proportioned roughly like a person's, but his hands had 6 fingers each, and his chest was wrong, too wide, rising in a rhythm that was not a single breath, but 2 separate and slightly offset ones. He was young. I did not know how I knew that, but I knew it the same way you know a child is a child, even in the dark. Something in the proportions, something in the way fear looked on that face. He said something. The sounds were unlike any language I had heard, consonants that required a different throat than mine. But the translator chip embedded just below his jaw crackled to life a moment later and gave me a version of it. "Do not touch me. My people will come for me. You will step back and wait." His voice, even in translation, had the tone of someone used to being obeyed. Even now, even on the floor of a crashed ship in a creek bed in the mountains, bleeding from a wound on his left side that had soaked through whatever he was wearing and pulled dark beneath him, I set my pack down and opened it. "My name is Owen," I said. "I am going to help you. I am ordering you to step away. I heard you. I pulled out my trauma kit. I am still going to help you." He tried to move away from me, and the sound he made when he shifted his weight told me everything I needed to know about the severity of what I was dealing with. I had done field first aid in conditions that most people would consider extreme. A hiking accident 2 summers ago had left a man with a broken femur and internal bleeding 6 miles from the nearest road. and I had kept him alive for 4 hours until the helicopter reached us. Before that, I had served 2 years as a combat medic before a knee injury ended that chapter. I knew the difference between pain that was a signal and pain that was a warning. This was a warning. "You are hurt badly," I said, keeping my voice at the same level I would use to talk about the weather. "I do not know your biology. I am going to have to figure out what I can do as I go, but I need you to stop moving." The amber eyes fixed on me. He was calculating something. I could see it even on a face with no human points of reference. He was deciding whether I was a threat or a resource. "You are primitive," he said finally through the translator. "Probably," I said. Still, the wound on his left side was deep. Whatever had caused it during the crash had gone through the outer garment and into the tissue beneath, and the bleeding was steady. I could not tell what was normal for his physiology. I did not know if his blood pressure worked the way mine did not know if his tissue would react to the materials in my kit, did not know if anything I carried would help or hurt. I worked carefully. I pressed a clean cloth against the wound and held pressure with one hand while I checked the rest of him with the other, moving slowly, watching his face for reactions. He had a broken bone in his lower left limb. The angle was wrong in a way that was obvious. He was even under the clothing. His right arm appeared functional, but there was swelling around the joint near the shoulder that concerned me. And his breathing, those 2 separate offset rhythms. One of them was labored, shorter, catching. "How many hearts do you have?" I asked a pause. 2. "Are both of them working right now?" Another paused longer. "One of them is having difficulty." I kept my face neutral. "Okay. Tell me if anything I do makes that worse." He did not answer, but he did not try to move away from me again. I worked for 2 hours in that wreck. I stabilized what I could stabilize, cleaned and dressed the wound on his side as well as I was able to. And when I had done everything my kit and my knowledge allowed, I sat back on my heels and looked at him. He was still watching me. The bioluminescent lines under his skin had dimmed significantly from when I first found him. "You need somewhere warm and dry," I said. "I have a station cabin 400 mi north of here. Can you walk if I support you?" I should not leave the craft. The craft is not a safe place to spend the night. It is still releasing heat in sections, and I do not know if the fuel or power systems are stable. If something ignites, I cannot get you out in time. He considered that. His pride was fighting with his survival instinct. And I watched the fight play out across his alien face in ways I was only beginning to learn to read. "You will not attempt to restrain me," he said, "or contact your authorities. My radio is dead, and I am not interested in restraining you." I got to my feet and offered him my hand. "I am interested in keeping you alive until your people come. That is all." He looked at my hand for a long moment. Then he reached up and took it. We made it to the cabin in 40 minutes. It should have taken 8. He was in a great deal of pain and too proud to say so, and I was in no position to argue. I got the stove going and got him onto the cot in the back room and sat on the floor beside him and talked to him in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular, about the mountains, about the way the creek sounds different in spring than in summer, about a particularly stubborn black bear that had been raiding the supply locker at the North Tower for 3 years. I do not know if he understood all of it through the translator. I do not know if it helped, but he was still breathing when the light came through the window. Both rhythms uneven, but present. I got up, made coffee, and started trying to figure out how to keep him alive until someone came for him. That was the first night. I did not know then that it would be 43 more before anyone did. On the second day, he told me his name. He said it in his own language first, a sound my throat could not fully replicate. Something close to Verithol, but with a tonal quality on the last syllable that I could not manage. He watched my attempts with an expression I was beginning to recognize as resigned patience. The face a teacher makes when a student keeps mispronouncing the same word. "Verithol," I said again, as close as I could get. "That is acceptable," he said through the translator. "Owen Hale," I said, pointing at myself. He looked at me for a moment. "Owen," he repeated, and the translator gave it back perfectly. He had a better ear than I did, apparently. "That is acceptable," I said. He did not smile. His facial structure did not allow for a human smile. Exactly. But something shifted around the eyes, a slight relaxation in the muscles around those amber irises, and I filed that away as something to watch for. The first week was difficult, not because he was uncooperative. Exactly. But because I was essentially doing medicine on an alien without a medical textbook, without instruments calibrated for his biology, and without any way to be certain that what I was doing was helping rather than simply not making things worse. His wound was the most immediate concern. I changed the dressing twice daily, watching carefully for signs of infection. His tissue responded differently than human tissue. The color change around the wound edges was not the angry red I was used to seeing, but a deep violet that I did not know how to interpret. I asked him. "That is normal," he said. "It means the tissue is regenerating." "Good. What does infection look like for you?" He described it. It was different from what I knew, but not unrecognizable in principle. I adjusted what I was doing accordingly. The broken bone in his lower limb concerned me more than anything else. Without imaging equipment, I had set it as best I could judge by hand and feel, and I had built a splint from materials in the supply locker, the kind of improvised construction that my old instructor would have considered acceptable under field conditions. Whether it was aligned properly, I could not be certain. I told him this. "If it heals crooked," he said, "it can be recorrected at a medical facility." "I know, but I would rather get it right the first time if we can." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are very focused on this. It is my job." "You are a ranger," he said. The translator had given him that word from when I had explained my role. That is a territorial guardian, a ground monitor, not a healer. I have some training in field medicine, enough to manage in situations where there is no alternative, and there is no alternative here. "Not one that helps you," I said. He was quiet again after that. He had a way of going silent that was not uncomfortable. Not the silence of someone ignoring you or someone who had run out of things to say, but the silence of someone processing something carefully. I came to recognize it as a kind of thinking posture. He would go still, his breathing would even out, and the faint lines of bioluminescence under his skin would shift patterns slightly, slow and subtle, like clouds moving on a windless day. I did not push him when he went quiet. I had learned early in my medical training that patients do not owe you their thoughts, only their cooperation. And he cooperated. Mostly the resistance came in other forms. He did not want to eat what I offered. Some of it he rejected with a flat look that needed no translation. Some of it he accepted with clear effort, the expression of someone consuming something entirely unpleasant, because they understood the necessity. I worked through my supplies trying to find things that his system could tolerate, keeping track of what caused problems and what did not. By the end of the first week, I had a rough working list. Protein, and he needed a great deal of it. Certain fats were fine, others were not. Simple carbohydrates processed normally. Anything fermented or acidic caused visible distress. I adjusted the menu accordingly. It was not gourmet, but it kept him going. "You are cataloging me," he said on the 8th day, watching me make notes in the small journal I kept in my kit. "I am keeping track of what works," I said, "so I do not have to guess twice. You are also studying me." I looked up. "Is that a problem?" He considered. "No," he said finally. "It is practical. It is what I would do." A pause. "It is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" The amber eyes moved to the window. "Fear," he said. "Submission or aggression. Those are the typical responses of a less advanced civilization to the unknown." I capped my pen. "I have been afraid plenty of times," I said. "It does not usually help with the immediate problem." He looked back at me. and I am the immediate problem. You are the immediate patient, I said. That is a different thing. He went quiet again. But the bioluminescent lines shifted. In that way I was learning to associate with something that might be in his terms, something close to interest. The second week brought a new challenge. His secondary cardiac muscle, the one that had been laboring that first night, began to stabilize, which was good. But the stability came with a kind of exhaustion I had not anticipated. He slept for long stretches, too long by human standards. But I reminded myself that I did not know what normal recovery looked like for his species. I sat nearby when he slept, reading or working through what repairs I could manage to the cabin's equipment, and I checked on him at regular intervals. His breathing, the color of the regenerating tissue, the warmth of his skin. On the 11th night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to find him sitting upright on the cot, staring at the ceiling. "Are you in pain?" I asked, already reaching for my kit. "No," he said. I waited. "I am thinking about my family," he said. "They will believe I am dead." We were traveling near an unstable gravity fold. The probability of surviving an uncontrolled entry into an uncharted atmosphere is considered very low. I sat on the floor across from him. "Do they know where you were headed when it happened? They will be able to narrow the search region, but this planet is not in our charts. It is classified as pre-cont. They will not expect to find anything here except what they expect to find." He paused. "A body." I thought about that. Your emergency beacon. You said the ionospheric interference was blocking it. Yes. Above 800 km, the signal cannot penetrate the atmosphere of this planet. It has unusual ionization layers. I was not prepared for it. Something in his expression tightened. I was not prepared for several things. The beacon will eventually break through. If the interference pattern shifts, it shifts cyclically on most Class 7 atmospheres. But the cycle could be weeks, months. I nodded slowly. "Then we keep you healthy until it does," I said. "And when it does, they come and get you." He looked at me with an expression I could not fully read yet. "You say that as though it is simple." "It is simple," I said. "It is not easy, but it is simple. You need to recover. We need to wait. When they come, you go home. That is the whole plan." He was quiet for a long time. "You do not ask me what they will do when they arrive." He said, "Whether they will consider this world a threat, whether they will consider you a threat, whether your cooperation will protect you or simply make you a more convenient problem to resolve." I looked at him. Another silence, this one different from the others, heavier. "My mother," he said carefully, "is the matriarch of the Verith Dominion. She commands the largest fleet in this spiral arm. When she receives confirmation that I was on this planet, she will come personally with that fleet." He paused. "The response to a perceived threat to a royal heir has historically been significant." "How significant?" He did not answer that directly. "What I am telling you," he said, "is that you are taking a risk you may not fully understand." I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the wind was moving through the pines the way it always did this time of night. That low and steady sound that I had lived with long enough to stop hearing most of the time. "You are still my patient," I said. He made a sound that the translator did not render as words. Something between a sigh and something else. "You are either very brave or very foolish. My old medic instructor used to say the line between those two things is mostly paperwork." I said he did not understand the reference, but the bioluminescent lines shifted again. I was getting better at reading them. What I saw in that moment, I would later come to understand as something close to gratitude, though he would not have used that word for another 3 weeks. I went back to sleep. He stayed awake, but he let me. By the 3rd week, we had settled into a routine, which sounds mundane, but routines are how survival works in isolated places. They are the skeleton that holds the difficult days together. I made the same rounds each morning, checking the equipment, checking the weather instruments that still functioned, checking on him. He was mobile now, carefully mobile, using the improvised crutch I had built from the supply locker timber, and he had begun to move around the cabin on his own, which was a good sign, and also occasionally startling since I would turn around from the stove and find him standing in the doorway of the back room, watching the forest through the window with an expression of concentrated focus. "What are you looking at?" I asked the first time this happened. "The organisms in the mornings. Protein helps." He watched me move around the cabin. I did not look at him directly. "Owen," he said. I turned. "I do not know what my mother will do when she arrives." He said, "I told you that before. I still do not know. She is not a simple person, and her response to things is not always predictable. But I want you to understand something." He paused. The bioluminescent lines were running the slow, deep pattern I had first seen the night he said he was not in it. "Whatever happens, I want you to understand that I know what you did for me. I know what it cost in time and effort and uncertainty. I know that you did not do it for a reason, not for safety or reward or leverage. You did it because I was hurt and you were there." He stopped. I waited. "My people do not entirely believe that is possible," he said. "For a stranger to choose effort and cost for no return, it is considered either a manipulation or an error in judgment." Another pause. "I would like you to know that I no longer believe that about you." I looked at him for a moment, at the alien face that had become somewhere in 43 days a familiar one. "I appreciate that," I said. "Now eat something." The bioluminescent lines did the thing I now knew meant something close to a smile. He ate. The 11 days between the beacon breaking through and the arrival of the fleet were the strangest of my life, which is a significant statement given the previous 43. On the surface, nothing changed. The routine continued. Morning checks, meals, the chessboard in the evenings, which Verithol now won more often than not, and which I was genuinely enjoying even when I lost. Partly because of the quality of the competition, and partly because of what his face did when he found an unexpected solution. His recovery continued to progress. The wound on his left side had closed cleanly. The bioluminescent lines around it brighter now than the surrounding skin, a sign he had explained meant new tissue growth. The bone in his lower limb was solid enough for him to walk without the crutch. Though he moved carefully, and I kept reminding him not to push the weight bearing too fast, but underneath the routine, the air in the cabin had changed. Not badly, not with tension or hostility. It was more like the feeling before a weather system arrives when you have lived in mountain country long enough to read the pressure changes in your own body before any instrument confirms them. Something significant was coming and we both knew it, and there was no useful way to prepare for it. So we did not try. "Tell me about your mother," I said on the third night after the beacon signal. We were sitting at the table after the chest pieces had been put away. 2 cups between us, the lamp throwing steady yellow light across the wood grain. He did not answer immediately, which I had learned to interpret as the specific kind of silence that meant he was deciding how much honesty to apply. "She is the most capable person I have ever known," he said finally. "And possibly the most difficult. Difficult how?" "She does not accept failure," he said, "in others or in herself. She has held the Dominion together through 2 internal conflicts and 1 external war in her governing period alone. She made decisions in those years that no one else was willing to make." A pause. She was right. That is what makes her difficult. She is usually right, and she has very little patience for the process of convincing people of that. "And when she arrives here," I said, "what will she see?" He looked at the table. "She will see a pre-Kant world, a primitive civilization, a ranger station in a forest, and a human male who is by any external measure in possession of her son. I am not in possession of you. I know that. You know that." He looked up. "She will not know that. Not immediately. Her first response to a situation is always threat assessment. It is trained, not personal. Every Dominion commander learns to see potential threats before anything else. So she will see a threat. Yes. And the fleet? Yes, I thought about that. 17 ships, he had told me, the night the beacon broke through when he walked me through what a standard Royal Recovery response looked like. 17 ships, heavy class escorts among them, military-grade armament, and the matriarch's personal command vessel, which was in a category that required its own classification. "What do you want to happen?" I asked. He looked at me with an expression that had too many layers for me to read all of them at once. "I want my mother to understand what actually occurred here," he said, "without the threat assessment framework overriding it. And if it does override it, then I will tell her the truth and manage the consequences," he said. "I am still technically her son. That carries some weight." "Technically," I said, "it has been a long 43 days for both of us," he said, with a dryness that I had not expected from him at the start of any of this, and had come to appreciate considerably. On the 7th day after the beacon signal, he began preparing me. That is the best way I can describe it. He started going through protocols, terminology, what to do and not do when standing in the presence of Verith royalty, what gestures carried what meanings, what to say, and what to absolutely avoid saying. It was, he informed me, a condensed version of the diplomatic briefing that foreign representatives to the Dominion received over the course of 6 months. I told him I would do my best. "Your best will need to be specific," he said. "Do not bow unless I signal you to unit. The individual, state your terms." I opened my mouth. Verith Saul stepped forward and spoke first in the Verith language, fast and clear and with a tone that I had not heard from him before, something that carried the full weight of everything he had been trained to be. The meadow went very quiet. The commanders looked at each other. The guard held their positions. The matriarch, standing at the center of all of it, had gone completely still. She made a sound that I did not have a human word for. It was not anger. It was not a command. It was a sound that a person makes when something they had been certain of turns out to be wrong. When the world rearranges itself around a fact they had not allowed for. Her son was alive, walking, standing on his own legs in the mountain light. And she had come here to recover a body. She stood in the meadow with the fleet behind her and the guard at her sides and the commanders at her back. And for a moment, just a moment, she was not the matriarch. She was a mother looking at her child alive when she had been certain he was gone. I looked away. I gave her that moment the same way I had given Verithal his privacy at the window 2 days ago. I drank the last of my coffee. It was cold. Then I set the mug on the porch rail and walked down the steps into the meadow because it seemed like the right thing to do. And I waited to see what happened next. Standing in a meadow in front of 17 alien warships turns out to be a clarifying experience. There are things you think you might do in a situation like that. Strategies you imagine yourself running. Arguments you rehearse in your head. Versions of the scene in which you say the right thing at exactly the right moment. I had spent pieces of the last 11 days turning this encounter over in my mind. Not obsessively, but the way you check your gear before a difficult climb, methodically making sure nothing was left unprepared. What I had not prepared for was how completely different the real thing would be from every version I had imagined. The real thing was 4 alien military commanders walking toward me across wet morning grass, while their matriarch held a reunion 30 men behind them that I was specifically not watching. And the lead commander, the one with the most elaborate rank insignia on his chest piece, stopping 6FT away from me and looking at me with an expression that I had no reference point for at all. He was large, larger than Verithal, larger than the matriarch, with a broader build that suggested either a different regional population or the specific physical development of someone who had spent decades in military roles. The bioluminescent lines on his skin were dim, close to absent, which I had learned from Verth Saul was a characteristic of older individuals in whom the biological signaling function had reduced over time. His amber eyes were direct and unwavering, the eyes of someone who assessed things professionally and quickly. "State your full identification," he said through the translator. "Owen Hale," I said, "Wilderness Ranger, Northern Ridge Station, District 7, 11-year post. He absorbed that. Owen Hale, he repeated, apparently satisfied with the translator's rendering. You are the individual who reported contact with the royal transport on the night of the incident. I did not report it, I said. My radio was out. I simply responded. A slight pause. You responded without reporting. I was 3 miles from the nearest functioning communication point, and there was a living being in a crashed vehicle. Yes, I responded without reporting. The commander looked at me for a moment. And you kept the royal secured for 43 days. I noticed the word. I kept my patient recovering for 43 days. I said he was not secured. He was free to leave at any point. He could not leave. He was injured. Yes, that is why I was there. The commander studied me with that professional evaluating expression. To his left, one of the other commanders had opened a small device and appeared to be doing something with it, running some kind of scan or record. I looked at the device and then back at the lead commander and did not ask what it was. Asking would be managing the situation, and I had decided on the porch that I was not going to manage this. I was going to let it be what it was. Your species, the lead commander said, has not been formally catalogued in the Dominion registry. You are below the threshold for official contact. I know, I said. Verithol told me. Another pause, slightly longer this time. You have been in extended communication with the Royal Air. We spoke quite a lot. Yes, there is not much else to do in a mountain cabin for 43 days. The commander processed that. What did you discuss? History, mostly his people and mine. Chess, bird identification, the relative merits of various protein sources when your supply options are limited. I paused. He is very good at chess. Whatever the commander had expected me to say, that was not it. I watched him recalibrate. To my right, footsteps in the grass. The other commander, the one with the scanning device, was moving in a wide arc around me. I tracked the movement with peripheral vision and kept my eyes on the lead commander and did not react. He was doing what security-minded people do, checking angles, looking for weapons, assessing threat. I had nothing on me except my belt knife, which was a working tool I had been wearing so long. I'd stopped thinking of it as anything else. I did not reach for it or draw attention to it. I stood and let him complete his arc and come back around. You are not armed, the lead commander said. Not in any meaningful sense, I said. I have a field knife. I use it to cut rope. You meet a fleet of Dominion warships with a rope knife. I was already outside when your ships appeared, I said. I was not expecting a fleet. I was expecting coffee and possibly a hawk. The commander looked at me for a long, very flat moment. Then he turned and said something in the Verth language to the commander beside him, short and precise, and that commander responded in the same way. And whatever passed between them in that exchange, it was not what they had expected to be saying. Behind them, the reunion in the meadow was ending. Verith Saul and his mother were walking toward us, and I had been right not to watch. Whatever had happened in those 30 mares of morning grass was private enough that even now, with it finished, there was a quality around both of them, the matriarch and her son, that felt like something that had been closed and sealed, something that would not be opened again in front of anyone. She was close up, even more impressive than she had been across the meadow. The bioluminescent lines on her skin did not pulse the way Verith Saul's did. They held steady, which I had not seen before, and I did not know what that meant for her specifically, but it had the quality of someone in complete control of something that is usually involuntary. Her expression was the expression of a person who has spent decades in positions where every emotion has consequences, and who has learned to keep the surface still. She stopped in front of me. The 4 commanders arranged themselves behind and to the sides of her, and the guard held their positions at the edges of the meadow, and the fleet hung above us in the morning sky, and I stood in my boots on the wet grass with an empty coffee mug in my hand. She spoke. Verth Saul translated, "You are Owen Hale." "Yes. My son tells me you found him in the wreckage and treated his injuries without any formal medical preparation. I have field medicine training." I said it was not formal medicine. We improvised. He tells me you kept him alive when the probability was against it. The probability was against it because it was a bad night and a bad crash. I said, not because it was impossible. She studied me with those amber eyes that were the same amber as her son's and currently held about 12 times the weight. He tells me you did not ask for anything. She said there was nothing to ask for. I said he needed care. I could provide some. That was the situation. A long silence. The lead commander behind her had the expression of someone recalculating. The one with the scanning device had put the device away, which I noted. You did not consider, the matriarch said carefully, the value of what you had. I thought about how to answer that. Verith Saw was standing to his mother's right, watching me with an expression that was impossible to read. But that was not worried. That mattered to me. I considered it. I said a young person was badly hurt and alone and frightened. That was what I had. I treated it like what it was. Another silence longer this time. You could have attempted negotiation, the matriarch said. Trade, political standing, safety guarantees for your world. Yes, I said. But you did not. No, why not? I looked at her directly. Because he was not a negotiating chip, I said. He was a patient. Treating a patient as a negotiating chip is not something I am willing to do. The meadow was extremely quiet. Somewhere above the treine, a bird called once and stopped. The lead commander spoke quietly to the one beside him. I caught none of it. The one beside him responded in the same tone. The matriarch did not look at them. She kept looking at me. Your people, she said, have a custom of negotiation as their primary political language. This is common at your developmental level. Pure resources, pure self-interest. These are what we expect from pre-Kant civilizations when confronted with a power differential this significant. Our people do that. Yes, I said. I also think we are more complicated than that. Most of us, when it comes to the actual moment, are more complicated than that. The matriarch was quiet again. Then she spoke, and Verithal translated it. But I could see by his expression that the translation was costing him something, that the words meant more to him than he was letting show. My intelligence division, he translated, ran a probability assessment before we entered this system. 94% probability that you had the royal heir under leverage. 5% probability that he was not found. 1% classified as other. He paused. You are the 1%. I have been told that before. I said in different contexts. What did it mean in those contexts? He translated. It meant I did something that the data said was unlikely. I paused. It usually meant I did the right thing. The lead commander made a sound. I did not know if it was a cough or a response. The scanning device commander had his eyes on me with an expression that was not hostile anymore, but had shifted into something else. Something that in a human face I would have called consideration. Verithal was not translating his mother's words. Now she had stopped speaking. She was simply looking at me. I looked back. I did not try to fill the silence. I was not afraid of silence. 11 years in mountain stations will do that for you. Then she said something short, not to me, to the lead commander behind her. He nodded. He spoke to the guard. The guard, all 8 of them, shifted out of their covering positions into something different, not at ease. Exactly, but no longer deployed. The matriarch turned to her son and spoke to him. He answered. She spoke again. He answered again. I watched their faces and understood nothing linguistically, but understood a great deal of it anyway. Because some things are readable regardless of species. The shape of a mother asking if her child is truly all right. The shape of a child who is all right, and is trying to communicate that fully and struggling to find the words because all right covers too much ground, because all right means alive and healed and also changed. And the changed part is the hardest to explain quickly. She put her hand against the side of his face the way any parent would. The bioluminescent lines on her skin shifted just once briefly out of that rigid, steady state, a pulse like the first real breath after you have been holding one for a very long time. Then she turned back to me. One of the other commanders, the second one, a female with rank insignia that ran vertically along her collar rather than horizontally, stepped forward and spoke. Her voice through the translator was precise and careful. In the absence of a formal Dominion-registered diplomatic framework for this world, she said, "The matriarch has asked me to communicate the following. The Dominion has a legal structure for situations in which a life debt is incurred by a member of the royal line to an individual outside the Dominion registry. You qualify under that structure. Under the terms of the statute, which is approximately 4,000 years old, the recipient of a life debt holds a permanent status designation. The matriarch is prepared to formally extend that designation to you, Owen Hale, pending your acceptance." I looked at Vareth Saul. He nodded once. "What does the designation involve?" I asked. The female commander read from something on her device. Named friend status within the Dominion registry. Diplomatic immunity across all Dominion space. A formal record associating your identity, and by extension your world, with the protection acknowledgement of the Vareth royal line. She looked up. No Dominion vessel will engage your people as a threat designation. No Dominion action may be directed against your world without formal review. The Matriarch's Council. In practical terms, she said, it means you and your people are safe permanently. I stood in the meadow with the grass wet beneath my boots and the fleet above my head and the morning light coming over the ridge the way it came. Every morning, and I thought about that. I accept, I said. A formality followed, brief and procedural. The female commander recording something and the matriarch providing what sounded like a formal confirmation in the Vareth language. It took about 4 minutes. Then the lead commander, who had been watching me the entire time with that recalculating expression, spoke. I need to understand something, he said. His voice was different now. Not official, not command mode. Something closer to direct curiosity. You maintained the royal heir for 43 days. You stabilized 2 cardiac events, a bone fracture, and a secondary tissue injury using materials that were not designed for Vareth biology. You monitored him daily, adjusted his nutrition, managed his recovery progression, and you have just told me you did all of this because he was a patient, not because of what he was worth. Yes, I said. Does every human do this? He said when confronted with an injured being that is different from them, unknown to them, potentially dangerous to them. I considered that honestly. No, I said, not every human, not always. We have a complicated history with that question, but you did. I did, I said. He nodded slowly. It was a very deliberate nod, the kind a person makes when they are changing the category they have filed something under. Then he said carefully, I need to update my assessment of your species. I looked at him. How were you assessing us before? He paused as a problem that had not yet required a solution. He said I nodded at that. I thought I understood what he was not saying. And now he said something then that the translator took a moment to render. Something that I suspect lost some of its weight in the conversion from one language to another, but which came through as, now we may have been asking the wrong question about you entirely behind him. The matriarch spoke to her son, and Vareth Saul looked at me, and in his expression was everything that the past 43 days had been, all of it, at once. And he said she is asking if you have more of that coffee. She would like to understand what you have been drinking every morning that apparently makes you this calm. I started laughing. I could not help it. It was not polite or calculated or strategic. It was just the honest response to the situation, which was, all evidence aside, genuinely funny. The lead commander stared at me. The female commander looked at her device and then at me. 2 of the guards shifted in their positions. The matriarch watched me laugh and then said something, and Vareth Saul translated it, and his voice was doing that thing where it was almost completely steady and not quite. She says he said that whatever quality your species possesses that allows you to laugh in front of a fleet. She thinks she finally understands why my beacon took 43 days to reach her. I wiped my eyes. How's that? She says the universe kept you busy. I went inside and made coffee. The coffee situation was more complicated than I expected. I had one full bag and roughly a third of another, which represented about 4 days of my normal consumption. Divided among the matriarch, the 4 commanders, Verith Saul and myself, accounting for the fact that I had no idea what quantity would be appropriate or what reactions Verith biology might have to caffeine that was a limited supply. I said this out loud to the matriarch of the Verith Dominion. She looked at me, and then she looked at her son, and then she said something that the translator rendered as, "Then we will not waste it." This was how the most important first contact event in the history of my species was conducted. 6 people sitting around a table inside a mountain cabin that was built for 2 with a pot of coffee that had to be stretched and a chessboard that had been moved to the counter to make room. While outside in the meadow, 17 warships sat in the grass, and their crew waited with professional patience for their commanders to finish whatever was happening in the small wooden building with the lamp on the table. The lead commander's name was Verith Kor. He introduced himself formally once we were inside, and there was a quality to the introduction that suggested formality was how he processed unusual situations, a kind of anchor. He sat at the far end of the table with his hands flat on the wood in front of him and his rank insignia catching the lamplight. And he did not touch the coffee for the first 15 minutes, watching everyone else first. The female commander was Satha. She sat beside him, and she had put her device away completely, which I noticed and filed as significant. She drank the coffee almost immediately upon receiving it with the careful expression of someone noting data, and she said it tasted of something she did not have a word for, and then asked me 3 rapid questions about the cultivation, preparation, and chemical composition, all of which I answered as fully as I could, with the admission that I could not speak to the chemical composition beyond the basics. The other 2 commanders sat on the near side of the table, and they were quieter, observing the way experienced people observe when they are in a situation that has departed from procedure, and they are waiting to understand what procedure is going to look like on the other side of it. The matriarch sat across from me at the head of the table with Verith Saul right. She did not speak immediately. She held the cup in both hands the way I did when the mornings were cold. Not because she was cold, but because it seemed to be the right way to hold it. And she looked at the table, and then at the room, and then at me. "My son tells me you talked to him while you worked," she said when he was badly hurt. "You talked to him even when he could not understand you." "Yes," I said. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Afraid patients do better when there is a voice in the room. I said, even if the words do not land, the presence does. The sound of someone nearby who is calm and working, it helps. She absorbed that. You assumed that would apply across species. I assumed it might. I said I was not certain, but the cost of being wrong was low, and the cost of not trying it, when it could have helped, was higher. So I talked. Verith Kor at the end of the table spoke without preamble. "What did you talk about?" "The mountains?" I said the creek. A black bear that had been bothering my supply locker. "Ordinary things ordinary to you?" He said yes, but I thought ordinary was probably what was needed. He nodded again, the same deliberate nod. He had done it 3 times now, and I was beginning to understand it as the physical marker of something being categorized in a new way. The matriarch put down her cup and said something to Verith Saul in the Verith language, long and quiet, not for translation. He listened without interrupting, which I had learned was the polite form in their culture, and when she finished, he spoke briefly in return, and she made a short sound that I recognized as acknowledgement. Then she looked at me and spoke in the Verith language, and Verith Saul translated it. She says that in 43 years of governance, he said, and his voice was doing that almost steady thing again. She has met many people who wanted something from her. Politicians, military leaders, representatives of other civilizations, people who wanted trade access, military support, protection agreements, formal recognition. She says she has become skilled at identifying the shape of want in a person before they express it, the posture of it, the way the eyes move. He paused. She says she does not find that shape in you, and she does not know what to do with the absence of it. I looked at the matriarch, at those amber eyes that had been frightened for 43 days, and were only now beginning to let that go. "Tell her," I said carefully, "that I am glad her son is alive. That is the only thing I want from this situation. That is the only thing I wanted from the beginning." Verith Soul translated. The matriarch listened, and then she did something I was not prepared for. Not because I had not been warned that something like it might happen. Not because I lacked cultural context, but because you can know a thing intellectually and still find yourself standing on the wrong side of the reality of it. She bowed. The matriarch of the Verith Dominion, sovereign of 43 systems, commander of the oldest fleet in the Spiral Arm. A woman who had held an empire together through wars and internal conflicts by being consistently right and completely willing to make the hard decisions, bent forward over the table in a bow that was not a diplomatic nod, not a greeting gesture. A full bow, head inclined, hands flat. The bow of a person acknowledging something they cannot pay back. Behind her, Verith Kor and Satha and the other two commanders did the same. And outside in the meadow, the guard bowed. I know this because Verith Saul told me afterward. I could not see them from inside, but he said that the guard, all 8 of them, who had been standing at the edges of the meadow in formal position, bowed at the same moment their commanders did, because the signal had gone out through the command channel, because the matriarch had called for it. Because this was what the life debt protocol looked like when it was enacted by someone who understood the full weight of what the words meant. I stood up. I did not think about it. Standing felt like the right response, and then I bowed back. Not a bow I had been taught or practiced, just the natural inclination of someone who recognizes that they are in the presence of something genuine and wants to meet it with equivalent sincerity. The table was very quiet outside. The morning was moving fully into itself. The kind of clear mountain morning that follows a cold night where the air is sharp and the light has a quality that makes every edge visible. A woodpecker had started working at something in the pines to the north. The creek would be running full from the overnight cold. That specific sound of water moving fast over stones. Verith Saul poured himself more coffee. He had at some point over the past 43 days genuinely developed a taste for it. His mother watched him do this with an expression that was deeply private. "There are things we need to discuss," Satha said. Her voice was practical. She had a gift for moving a situation forward when it had reached the point where practical matters needed to happen. The formal registration, the named friend designation, and what it requires for the record, the assessment of this world's status in relation to Dominion space. She paused. And the question of the royal transport wreckage in the ravine, which my team needs to secure. "I can show your team the ravine," I said. "I know the terrain." SA looked at me. "You know the terrain well enough to guide a Dominion. Technical team through uncharted wilderness. I know this ridge in the dark well enough to run it." I said, "Your team will be fine." She made a note on her device. "That would be useful," she said. "Thank you." Verith Kor was looking at me still. He had been looking at me with that recalculating quality through most of the morning, and I had grown accustomed enough to it that I was startled when he finally spoke the thing he had been building toward. "Oh, and hail," he said. "I want to tell you something." I looked at him. "I have been in the Dominion military for 31 years. He said, "I have been through 2 conflicts and 1 war, and more political situations than I can number. In that time, I have assessed a very large number of individuals for threat and capacity." He put his hands flat on the table. "What I assessed you as this morning was incorrect. I want to acknowledge that directly. It was an error I made quickly and without sufficient information. And the error was in the direction of underestimation." "You could not have known," I said. "That is true," he said. "But I could have allowed for the possibility of being wrong. I did not. The assessment I ran assumed a ceiling on what a pre-Kant species individual was capable of. You exceeded that ceiling significantly." He paused. "I would like to record this in my official report, not as a diplomatic statement, as a professional correction. An individual from an uncharted pre-Kant world stabilized a royal heir under field conditions with no designed equipment, maintained him for 43 days, and managed the subsequent contact situation with more composure than most trained diplomatic personnel demonstrate in formal settings. I did not know what to say to that. So I said he was a good patient mostly. Verith Saul made a sound. Sa pressed her lips together briefly. Even Verith Kaur at the end of the table made that very deliberate nod one more time, and this time I saw what was behind it. It was the nod of someone who had just decided something definitively. The matriarch spoke. Verithal translated. She asked what you will do now. He said, I thought about that. Go back to work. I said the North Tower relay still needs finishing. There is probably a report to file about an unusual meteorological event. The bear will have been at the supply locker again, Verithal translated. His mother listened. Then she said something and he translated it. And his voice this time was entirely, completely, unapologetically unsteady. She says he said that in the 6,000-year history of the Verith Dominion, no world has ever entered into the named friend designation through the actions of a single individual, through diplomacy, through war, through formal negotiation, never through this. He stopped. His mother said something else short and quiet, and he took a breath and translated it. She says that what you are, Owen Hale, is something the Dominion does not have a category for, and she says that she believes we are poorer for the absence of that category. He paused. She says she intends to remedy that. Outside, the woodpecker continued its work. The creek ran full over the stones. The morning was exactly what it had been every morning for the 11 years had spent on this ridge, ordinary and enormous, and impossible to fully take in. In 6 hours, the technical team would secure the ravine and recover what remained of the transport. In 2 days, the formal registration would be completed, and the named friend documentation would enter the Dominion record in a file that would carry my name and my world's coordinates for as long as the Dominion existed. In 3 days, Verith Saul would leave. He stood at the door of the cabin with his full health restored and his formal garments and his rank restored to him. And he looked at me the way people look at places that have changed them in ways they are still discovering. I will come back. He said not as a diplomatic statement, as a fact. I know I said you still owe me a rematch. He made that sound. The one that was the Verith equivalent of a laugh, real and full and without reservation. The same sound I had first heard on day 31 of a long night in a mountain cabin. You will lose, he said. Probably, I said. Worth finding out. He left. The fleet left. The meadow was empty again. The grass flattened in shapes that would slowly right themselves over the next few days. Like any grass recovers from any weight when the weight moves on, I stood at the edge of the porch and watched the sky until the last light of the ships was gone. Then I went inside and refilled my coffee and opened my logbook and started the entry. I wrote the date and the weather and the creek level and the status of the North Tower Relay Standard daily entry, the form my supervisor expected. At the end in the section labeled Notable Events, I wrote first contact with an alien civilization. Peaceful outcome. We'll provide full report at next check-in. I closed the logbook. The bird came back overhead. The red-tailed hawk, or its twin, making that long, slow circle above the tree line, riding a current of air that had been there long before this morning and would be there long after. I watched it for a while. I thought about 43 days and 2 hearts in a chess game and the way the universe sometimes, not always, but sometimes rewards the refusal to do the easy thing. I thought about a mother who bowed. I thought about a commander who said the word underestimation like it was a thing he was ashamed of, and the specific kind of person who admits a mistake in those terms when they do not have to. I thought about a young man, not human, not from anywhere near this world, who had been furious and frightened and in tremendous pain, and who had looked at me holding a cup of coffee in front of 17 warships, and laughed the way you laugh when something has turned out better. Then you had any right to expect. I finished the coffee. I set the mug on the rail. I went to fix the relay. The mountain did not care about any of this. The mountain just continued being a mountain. The pines moved in the wind. The creek ran clear. The morning went about its ordinary enormous business. I think that was the right answer. I think in the end that is the whole point. You do the work. You keep the patient alive. You tell the truth about what you are and what you want and why you are there. You make the coffee. You laugh when something is funny. You bow when something is worthy of a bow. And then you go fix the relay because the relay needs fixing, and it is your job. And the mountain is waiting. And there is nothing else to do but continue. We will be all right. I have thought about it carefully, and I genuinely believe we will be all